All right, fifth graders, as I mentioned yesterday, Facing West, the story of the Oregon Trail is about a boy and his sister, well, his family really, and about their journey to go out west. If you haven't had a chance to take a look, you should take a look at the map that's here. I posted a picture of it in the classroom, the Google Classroom, but you can see over here is Florida, up about here is New York. You can see all the way over here is where our story is going to take place, and over here is California. Down here is Mexico, and up here is Canada. So you can see right in the beginning they give you a little bit of story before the story even begins. Chapter 1 is called The Elephant. The Elephant. Are you ready to look for the elephant, Bear Cub? Ben's head spun around and he stared at the stranger. He could feel his mouth fall open. The man was all fur and fringe, topped with a coonskin cap. Wild black hair hung below his shoulders and beard covered his chest. Leather strings swung from his beaded shirt. The man was big, and he smelled bad, too. Ben thought he must have missed his Saturday baths for a year, maybe longer. I'm hearing a lot of things in here already on the very first page that you could put into your journal entries. One of them is the types of clothes people wore. Our author's clearly trying to describe the types of clothes to put us into the time period that the story is set in, which I think is really cool. Along with this story are a lot of pictures, so I'm going to be showing you these pictures as we go. My name's Pete, the stranger said. I'll be leading your wagon train across the Oregon Trail. Ben jumped to his feet. You know the way? You've been there? Is it wonderful as they say? His question spilled out. Is the air clear? Is the trail really so dangerous? Whoa there, Bear Cub. Pete held up his hands. One question at a time is all an old mountain man like me can get a handle on. Ben thought for a moment. How dangerous is the trail? He asked. That was the worry that had kept him up all night. Are we going to make it? Well, now, that's hard to say, the mountain man pulled on his mustache. If you don't die of hunger or thirst, or your wagon doesn't roll off a cliff or wash down a river, if you don't die of camp sickness, if you don't get eaten by the wild Indians, if the rattlesnakes and bears don't crawl into your bed some night, well, then you'll make it. Maybe. Ben shivered. That's what he was afraid of. His family was going to Oregon. They were going to die on the way. And it was all his fault. His chest felt tight. It was a feeling he hated. Everyone faces something along the trail, Pete went on, something awful. They call it seeing the elephant. Most folks face it down to live and tell the tale. Others die trying. Ben was sorry he had asked. Again, I'm going to show you this picture again so you can envision their conversation beginning to happen. Pete looked off to the east, raised his pistol, and fired it into the sky. Ben jumped, then he heard pistols being fired all along the wagon train. Sun's up, Bear Cub. Time to get the wagons all ready to roll, Pete said. Keep an eye out for the elephants now. And he headed off through the early spring grass toward the horses. Now I want to stop here for a second. I'm not going to be doing stop and jots in these videos, but I am going to be doing stop and think alouds. So I want you to be thinking and also taking some notes while I'm reading. What are some things that you're hearing that you could then take and put into your journal entries? Remember, during reading, we do our best to think carefully about what we're reading, analyze the text, and think, how can I use this as a writer in my writing? Ben, Mama's voice called through the canvas roof of their new wagon. How could you wander off like that? What if you had a bad breathing spell out on the prairie?" "Oh, sorry, Mama," Ben said quietly. The doctor had told them he could have a spell anywhere, any time now. He almost wished he could just stop breathing. That way, he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Your big sister is getting firewood. You sit down and mind the kettle while I dress Becky. Here. I'm sensing another thing that the author is putting into her writing to get us to imagine the time period, and that is that they're using a kettle to cook and fetching firewood. Very different from when you go and turn on your stove, or hopefully you as the parent turn on your stove in your house. They have to fetch firewood and actually put a kettle over the fire to make food. His mother held out a book. "Write in a journal. It will be a daily chore for the trip. Nobody else will have time." Wow, this is perfect. Our main character is writing a journal, and we are also writing historical fiction journals. Ben didn't want to write today, or any other day. He didn't like writing. He wanted to explore the wagon train. Their boat had pulled into the Independence, Missouri only yesterday. Pa had met a family on the dock and wanted to quit and go home before they even begun the trip west. Go backs, Pa called them. He bought their wagon and gear. Suddenly, Ben and his family were on their way to Oregon. So there's another piece of vocabulary that you could include into your writing. While we're reading, I really want you to listen up for that vocabulary and then go ahead and jot that down as a note, either in your Google Docs or maybe you're writing pen and paper on things that you could include. And that term, go backs, that's a really popular term that was used a lot for people that would stop the Oregon Trail or stop whatever trail they were on and then go back to where they came from. They either decided they didn't have enough money, it was too dangerous, it took too long. That happened a lot. "The sooner we get started," Pa said, "the better we'll have to go along the way. The better we'll have it along the way. After all these other wagon trains hit the trail, there won't be any firewood left for us or grass for our cows to graze." So the Clarks had moved their new wagon, their new oxen and cows, and their chickens and geese into place and left for Oregon. Pa always made up his mind that fast. Ben sat by the cook fire and opened his journal to the very first page. Amanda walked up and dropped a pile of firewood with a crash. She glared at him and stamped away. "It isn't my fault," he wanted to yell after his sister. "I didn't ask to have asthma." He fought his tears. 11-year-olds didn't cry. Besides, it could start a bad spell. For those of you who have asthma, you know that when you start coughing uncontrollably or when you can't get enough air into your lungs, that's called having a spell. So our main character here, Ben, is clearly worried about having a spell on the trail, especially since it's going to be so dusty. And it's not like he can just take a puff of his inhaler because those haven't been invented yet. April 18th, 1845, he wrote and stopped. What else should we write? Who would ever read it? He would probably not survive the trip anyhow. The asthma would get to him. He'd end up under one of those little crosses he'd heard about on the trail. They'd bury the book with him, he supposed, and his jackknife. A teardrop hit his blank page. "Howdy, partner," a boy's voice called across the campfire. Ben quickly wiped his eyes. "Smoke makes my eyes water up too," the boy said and grinned. "My name's Zach." "I'm Ben," he smiled at Zach. He couldn't help it. He'd never seen so many freckles on one face before, or he thought such pale yellow hair. "I'm glad your family is along instead of the folks who owned this wagon before," Zach said. "They only had 5 girls, nobody to have adventures with." "You have adventures?" Ben asked. "Every day," Zach said. "If I don't find them, I make them." Ben, are you finished writing yet? Mama climbed out of the wagon and helped Becky down. "Almost, Mama," Ben lied. "This is Zach." "Zachariah Mulberry, at your service, ma'am," Zach said, bowing low. His eyes twinkled as they caught Ben's. "My mother sends her best wishes and asks you to drop by at any time." "What a nice boy that is," Mama said after Zach left. Ben sat and watched as she made breakfast. Then he took out his knife and sharpened his pencil. "Day 1. We begin to ride the Oregon Trail," he wrote. Ooh, okay, so I'm hearing day 1. He didn't put a date specifically, but he did have a title, and that's Beginning to Ride the Trail. There was too much crowding. I guess day 1 technically is his title, his date, but we're going to be more specific with ours and put an actual date. There was too much crowding his mind to write, and all was bad. Their hurried start, the strange man Pete, elephant-sized dangers, asthma, little crosses. You can't start a journal that way. He scolded himself, even if it's all true. Finally, he remembered Zach and wrote, "I might have a new friend today." Pa walked up and took a plate full of eggs and bacon. He grinned at his wife. "The cows ate well, the oxen are fresh, and the sun is shining, and our family's together. We're off to take Oregon. And you'll get your farm at last." Mama reached across the breakfast cloth and held his hand. Ben looked away. They had left the house and carpenter shop Pa had built in St. Louis, because of him, and he knew it. The doctor had said that the air out west was healthier. "I'll go get water," he said. "No, son," Mom shook her head. "Your sister will do it, and while we feed the chickens." Amanda grabbed the bucket, glared, and stamped off. "You take the last piece of bacon?" Mama handed it to Ben. When the dishes were done and the oxen hitched up, Mrs. Clark drove the wagon into line. "Is this our place for the whole trip?" Amanda said. "I like being in the middle of 60 wagons. No, Mr. Clark said. He was riding beside them on Gray, the farm horse they'd bought from the Go-Backs. So I'm also hearing that buying things from Go-Backs in order to help your journey moving forward is something that people did pretty often. "We move up one place every day until we hit the front. Then we go to the back and work up again." "That's better," Ben said. "Everyone has turned down the trail at the head of the train. Everyone has a turn at the trail at the head of the train. I'm going to like this." But he didn't. "Sit up there, Ben," Mama said. Amanda and Becky were already in the wagon, and Papa had ridden to the back of the wagon train to herd their new cattle. Ben was just sitting down and the oxen started to pull. The whole wagon jerked forward and knocked his head against the blanket chest. The wagon rolled and bounced, jolted, and bumped over the trail. You can also describe, I'm going to stop and give you lots of ideas along the way if you couldn't tell already. You can also describe how the trail felt. You can imagine these wooden wheels. It's not like they have hydraulics and shocks like the nice cars that we have now, but really there's just a wooden wheel with maybe some metal on the outside, going on all these bumpy trails. It's not like also they have paved roads. These are all dirt trails with rocks along the way, so it's a very uncomfortable journey. He tried holding himself stiff. He tried sitting limp. He tried leaning, standing, lying back against the wooden bench. Nothing helped. "You haven't been getting much exercise, and that's why it hurts so," Mama said. "That's not my fault." Ben was hurting so much that he almost said it out loud. He remembered all the times Mama had made him walk and when he wanted to run, wait when he wanted to hurry, sit when he wanted to explore. All because of his breathing. He wiggled again. "Get out," Mama said finally. "Try walking." 2 hours later, the train halted at the noon break. The oxen needed an hour's rest. So did Ben. He sat down on the box. The oxen needed an hour's rest, and so did Ben. He sat down on the box to eat his cold biscuits, then stood up quickly. I was wrong, he thought. Day 1, we begin the walk to Oregon. And until next time, the next chapter is called Adventure. And I just want to reiterate that we're also still doing Read Aloud. So this is not Read Aloud. This is for reading. And if we were in class right now, we would all have our historical fiction material to be reading, or we would be reading Westward expansion material. And since we don't have access, not all of us have access to that at home, I'm just going to be reading to you some historical fiction content that you can take and put right into your writing. So hopefully you enjoyed that today. And